The door clicked shut behind him, and the world narrowed to the sound of our breathing. He was close enough that I could feel the heat of him through the thin fabric of my shirt, his shadow folding over me like a blanket. Somewhere outside, the city hummed and a distant car alarm flared and died, but inside the room there was only the quiet between us, tense, expectant, and unbelievably tender. His hands found my waist before I even realized they were searching, gentle at first, as if testing the rules we'd both been pretending weren't there. I turned into him, and everything made sense in a way I hadn't let myself imagine. His rough thumb tracing the line of my palm, the way his breath hitched when I smiled. We moved slowly, the kind of slow that feels like time giving you permission to be brave. When his mouth met mine, it was a soft collision that quickly deepened, a confused, glorious agreement neither of us tried to explain. Fingers threaded through hair, a laugh swallowed against his chest, whispered words that felt like small confessions. I was aware of every single detail, the scrape of the blanket, the lamp's warm halo, the flutter in my stomach that felt more like recognition than surprise. He asked, without speaking, whether I wanted this, and my silence answered for me. Not because I didn't have words, but because words felt too small for what was happening. There was care there, an undercurrent of respect that made the risk feel less like theft and more like an offering. We stayed wrapped in that fragile electric space until the rest of the night blurred into soft touches and quieter truths. It was the kind of moment you both savor and fear, because you know some lines have been crossed and nothing will be quite the same afterward. But to understand how I got here, let me take you back. Life in my apartment complex was usually quiet, the kind of place where people nodded politely in the hallway but rarely lingered to talk. I had moved there a few months earlier, chasing independence, freedom, and maybe a little loneliness I wasn't ready to admit to myself. Most nights, I would curl up with a book or binge something on my laptop, the hum of the refrigerator my only company. That's when I started noticing him, my neighbor. He lived just one door down, and somehow his presence became part of my routine. At first it was small things, the low murmur of his voice through thin walls when he took late-night calls, the sound of keys jingling when he came home long after midnight, the faint whiff of cologne that lingered in the hallway whenever he passed by. We didn't talk much beyond the usual courtesies. Good morning, when we bumped into each other leaving for work. A quick smile when we reached the lobby at the same time. It was simple, harmless. Yet, somehow, I caught myself waiting for those moments. My days felt incomplete without a glimpse of him. Sometimes I'd catch him leaning against his door, scrolling through his phone, waiting for a food delivery. He always had this calm, unbothered air, like he carried the night around with him. I couldn't help wondering what kept him awake so late, what stories lived behind those steady eyes. My own life felt painfully ordinary in comparison. I worked during the day, came home exhausted, cooked something quick, and scrolled through endless feeds until sleep claimed me. There was a part of me that longed for something more, an adventure, a spark, anything to remind me that life wasn't just about routines. And maybe that longing made me see him differently, as if he represented something just out of reach. One evening, I found myself lingering in the hallway longer than I needed to, pretending to fumble with my keys just so I could hear the muffled sound of his laughter through the door. It was ridiculous, really, how easily the smallest things stirred something inside me. I told myself it was just curiosity. Neighbors notice each other, that's all. But then came the little accidents. The night we both reached for our mail at the same time and his hand brushed against mine. The shared laugh when we realized we'd both ordered food from the same place. The way he held the elevator door open for me, his arm extended, his eyes catching mine in a way that felt a little too long to be casual. These moments were fleeting, but they stayed with me, replaying in the quiet of my room when the lights were off. I began to wonder if he noticed me too, if his glances were just politeness or something more. And then there was that night, midnight, the air heavy with summer heat, when everything shifted. I had been tossing and turning, unable to sleep, when a knock echoed softly against my door. At first, I froze. Who would be visiting at that hour? My heart raced, a dozen worries flashing through my mind. But when I peeked through the peephole, I saw him. My neighbor. He stood there, shoulders relaxed but eyes carrying something unspoken. The kind of look that made me hesitate not out of fear, but out of anticipation. What was he doing there at this hour, knocking on my door as if it was the most natural thing in the world? I hesitated only for a second before opening it, and in that simple choice, I unknowingly invited a night I would never forget. The moment I opened the door, the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Midnight had a way of making everything feel heavier, quieter, like the world outside didn't exist. He leaned slightly against the doorframe, his eyes catching mine before drifting down, as if he wasn't sure what to say first. "Sorry," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Did I wake you?" I shook my head, though in truth, I had been restless all night. No. I couldn't sleep anyway. Something in his gaze softened, like he was relieved by my answer. He scratched the back of his neck, a little nervous, though he tried to hide it under that calm, collected air I'd always noticed about him. I didn't feel like being alone tonight. Thought maybe you wouldn't mind some company." His words hung there, simple but loaded, and I realized my heart was racing far too fast for such a casual request. Still, I stepped back, gesturing for him to come inside. The soft click of the door behind him felt almost symbolic, like I had closed off the rest of the world and chosen this moment with him instead. He glanced around my small apartment, the stack of books on the coffee table, the half-empty glass of water on the counter, the blanket still rumpled on the couch. Somehow I felt exposed, like he was seeing more of me than anyone else usually did. We settled onto the couch, the glow of a small lamp casting shadows across the room. At first, our conversation was easy, safe. Work, neighbors, the weather, ordinary things. But beneath it all, there was a hum of something unsaid, something that pressed closer with each passing minute. At one point, he leaned back, his arms stretching along the back of the couch. Not quite touching me, but close enough that the warmth of his presence wrapped around me. My fingers fidgeted with the edge of the blanket, a nervous habit I couldn't seem to stop. "You're quieter than usual," he remarked softly, turning his head toward me. I laughed lightly, though it came out a little shaky. Maybe because it's midnight and my neighbor suddenly decided to knock on my door. He smiled, slow and almost teasing. "Would you have preferred I didn't?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No. I'm glad you did." The truth of it slipped out before I could filter it, and I saw the way his eyes lingered on me, searching, almost testing if I meant it. My chest felt tight, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of pressure that came from holding in too many words, too many feelings. As the minutes passed, our conversation drifted into more personal spaces. He admitted he often stayed up late, not because he had to, but because the silence felt less heavy when he wasn't alone. I told him about my restless nights, how the walls sometimes felt like they were closing in when I had nothing but my thoughts to keep me company. Somewhere in that honesty, a connection sparked, like we had unknowingly been carrying the same loneliness, just behind different doors. And then there were the smaller, quieter moments. His hand brushing against mine when he reached for the glass of water. The way our knees accidentally touched, neither of us moving away. His laughter filling the room, low and warm, making me realize how much I wanted to hear it again. Every touch, every glance felt magnified under the hush of midnight. What might have been dismissed in the daylight now lingered, impossible to ignore. At one point, he reached over and tugged the blanket from where it rested between us, draping it loosely over both our laps. It was such a small gesture, but the intimacy of it sent a shiver through me. My body leaned ever so slightly closer to his, as if drawn by a force I couldn't resist. And in that closeness, I felt it, the undeniable truth that something had shifted. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were two people teetering on the edge of something dangerous, thrilling, and completely unforgettable. The room had grown so quiet that I could hear the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. His presence beside me felt heavier now, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that made my skin tingle with awareness. I shifted slightly under the blanket we shared, pretending to adjust it, but in reality, I was hyper-aware of how close our hands had drifted. Just one small movement, and my fingers would brush his. I told myself not to, but my body betrayed me. My pinky grazed his knuckle, and instead of pulling away, he stilled, letting the contact linger. My heart skipped. "You're trembling," he murmured, his voice low, almost intimate. "I'm not," I whispered back, though the faint shake in my hand gave me away. He tilted his head, studying me like he could see every thought I was trying to hide. "You are? But maybe I shouldn't ask why." The way he said it made my breath catch. There was an unspoken question in his tone, one I wasn't sure I was ready to answer out loud. I tried to look away, to break the tension, but his hand moved, slow, careful. He brushed a strand of hair away from my face, his fingers grazing my cheek. The touch was featherlight, yet it sent a rush of warmth through me. I should have laughed it off. I should have leaned back, created space, reminded both of us of the line we were crossing. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned into his touch, just slightly, and that was all it took. His breath deepened, like he was holding back everything he wanted to say. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged, alive, filled with everything we couldn't voice. "Do you ever think," he started, then stopped, shaking his head like the words were too dangerous. "Think what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes locked onto mine, steady, unflinching. "That maybe we were supposed to meet at this exact moment? Like this." The confession cracked something open inside me. I had been trying so hard to ignore what was obvious, to pretend this was nothing more than a late-night visit. But now, the truth hung between us, undeniable. Before I could answer, thunder rumbled outside, startling me. The storm that had been threatening all night finally broke, rain tapping hard against the windows. It felt poetic, like even the world was pushing us closer. He shifted toward me, his knee brushing firmly against mine this time, no hesitation. My pulse raced. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, though his body leaned closer anyway. "Then why are you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because I don't want to leave." And in that moment, wrapped in the storm, the blanket, and the tension we could no longer deny, I knew we had crossed into something dangerous, and there was no turning back. The storm outside roared louder, sheets of rain against the window, thunder shaking the silence we had been wrapped in. But inside, the air was so still, like even time itself had paused to watch what was about to happen between us. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb brushing the skin so gently I almost thought I imagined it. My breath hitched, and in that pause, in that fragile heartbeat where neither of us spoke, I felt the moment tip over the edge. He leaned in slow, like giving me a chance to run, to say no, to stop this before it became something we couldn't take back. But I didn't move. I couldn't. And then his lips touched mine. Soft, hesitant, testing the waters. The kiss wasn't rushed. It was lingering, almost cautious, but it ignited something deep inside me that I hadn't let myself acknowledge until now. My fingers curled into his shirt without thinking, pulling him closer. The warmth of his body pressed against mine, and suddenly the storm outside seemed so far away. All I could hear was his breath, the soft sounds of our lips meeting again and again, each kiss growing deeper, more certain. He pulled back for just a second, his forehead resting against mine. His voice was rough, strained. "I shouldn't." "Don't," I whispered back. "Don't say it." And with that, he kissed me again, harder this time. No hesitation, no restraint. His hands slid to my waist, grounding me, while mine found their way up to his shoulders. The tension that had been simmering between us for so long finally erupted, and it felt like fire racing through my veins. The blanket we'd been sharing slipped to the floor unnoticed as we shifted closer, erasing any space left between us. His lips traced the corner of my jaw, down the side of my neck, leaving me breathless. My skin tingled under every touch, every slow, deliberate brush of his fingers. I closed my eyes, letting myself sink into the feeling, the taste of him, the warmth of him, the way every kiss seemed to strip away another layer of restraint. When his hands slid into mine, fingers intertwining, it wasn't just passion anymore. It was connection. Like we were silently confessing everything we'd been holding back. "Do you know how long I've wanted this?" he murmured against my skin, his voice low, ragged. I swallowed hard, whispering back, "Probably as long as I have." That admission seemed to break the last barrier between us. The kisses turned hungry, desperate, like we were both afraid the storm would end and reality would come crashing back too soon. My heart pounded so hard I swore he could feel it against his chest. His hands moved carefully, reverently, like every part of me was something to be cherished, not rushed. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking about consequences. I wasn't thinking about tomorrow or about the line we were crossing. All I could think about was how right it felt to finally give in. The world beyond that room ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, breathless, tangled, surrendering to something we had both been fighting for far too long. The storm outside kept raging, but inside, it was a different kind of storm. One that left me trembling, overwhelmed, and yet completely at peace in his arms. When we finally slowed, the urgency fading into something softer, he held me close, his chin resting on top of my head. His breath was still uneven, his heart hammering as wildly as mine. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Words would have broken it, made it real, and maybe we weren't ready for that yet. Instead, we just stayed like that, wrapped in warmth, in silence, in the fragile truth that we had finally crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And as the rain tapped against the window, I knew one thing for certain. This night would never leave me. It wasn't just a kiss. It wasn't just desire. It was the night everything changed. The rain had stopped by the time I opened my eyes. The soft glow of dawn peeked through the curtains, painting the room in muted shades of gray and gold. For a moment, I just lay there, still tangled in the warmth of the sheets, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. Reality crept in slowly, cautious but undeniable. My neighbor, the one I'd passed countless times in the hallway, exchanged casual smiles with, borrowed sugar from once. The man who, just hours ago, had knocked on my door after midnight, never knowing how different the night would become. I turned slightly, careful not to wake him, and studied his face in the soft light. He looked so peaceful, so different from the fire and urgency of last night. And I couldn't stop the rush of thoughts tumbling through my head. What happens now? Do we pretend this never happened? Or did last night mean as much to him as it did to me? My heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't from passion. It was from the weight of what came after. I slipped out of bed quietly, wrapping the blanket around me, and sat by the window. The world outside was washed clean by the storm, everything damp and glistening. It felt symbolic somehow, like the night had stripped something away, leaving behind only the truth neither of us could deny anymore. When he stirred and his eyes fluttered open, a flicker of panic sparked in me. But then he smiled, slow, warm, the kind of smile that held reassurance. "Morning," he whispered, voice husky. I managed a soft, nervous laugh. "Morning." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was gentle, almost comforting, like we were both silently agreeing that what had happened wasn't a mistake. It was inevitable. I still didn't know what it meant for tomorrow, or the day after, or if we could ever go back to being just neighbors again. But in that moment, with the storm past and the night behind us, I knew one thing for sure. Last night had changed everything. Whether it turned into something lasting or remained a secret memory, it would always be the night I let go of fear and let myself feel something I had been craving for far too long. And maybe, just maybe, It was the beginning of something neither of us had seen coming. Some nights change you forever, and this was one of them. What started as a simple knock after midnight turned into a secret I'll never forget, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something I didn't even realize I'd been waiting for. Have you ever had a moment where everything shifted in an instant? A night, a touch, a confession you'll never forget? Please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story.